Welcome back to the Detroit Lions News Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Chap, and today, obviously, we are going to be talking about training camp. Training camp, August 3rd. So, for you people that are seeing this on YouTube, you will get this first. Observations from training camp. This is part of the podcast. We're going to mix it in, but we have a lot of great stuff on the podcast. So, if you're on the YouTube channel, we'll put in the link in the description below the podcast. You can listen to the podcast, and if you want to skip over this part, and go listen to the podcast, you could do that. Or we will have the podcast on YouTube this year, and that's just for our YouTube fans who really show us a lot of love. So training camp observations today, and I'm gonna read this from DetroitLions.com. I almost just said Detroit Lions News, but we don't publish articles, we publish media stuff. So this is from DetroitLions.com, and listen, we are starting to see players come out of the woodwork in terms of what they are showing us and what they're doing. That pass and that run after the catch that Sam Laporta showed in that one video that they had, that was pretty incredible. But we are gonna read day 10 observations from Mike O'Hara and Tim Twentyman. They do a really good job and they are going to outline it for us. So defensive surge. I thought the defensive line had their best day of camp Thursday during a scrimmage like practice in Allen Park, led by Aiden Hutchinson. Detroit's defensive line was disruptive all day, blowing up plays with sacks not actually hitting the quarterback and stuffing runs in the hole. There was one team period where Hutchinson beat Penei Sewell to the quarterback for 2 sacks in a 3-play stretch. Let's stop right there. The fact that Aiden Hutchinson is beating Penei Sewell not once, not twice, in a 3-play stretch shows you what this kid is capable of. This sky is a limit for this kid. If you're an Aiden Hutchinson fan, if you watched him at Michigan, I know there's some people that are Michigan State fans or they're Ohio State fans and they're Lions fans. No problem. I'm along with you. But if you're a Michigan fan, you know all about the Detroit Lions, and you know all about Aiden Hutchinson and what he does on a daily basis. And he only got better at Michigan. That's what people don't get. He got better at Michigan, and he every year he really progressed at a high level. And then when he got to his senior year, where he just exploded onto the scene into some people, it was amazing to watch him play, and he really made a difference in that Ohio State game where he could not be stopped. And if this is the Aiden Hutchinson you're going to get this year, oh buddy. But Tim Twentyman goes on. He says, "I thought defensive lineman Lee McNeil also stood out Thursday. The quickness he's added to his game is noticeable. I also noticed Josh Paschal and Charles Harris having sacks on a day. This is a very good sign. Don't get it twisted. Don't say the Detroit Lions offense is reverting back to, maybe they're not going to be as good as they were last year. I don't believe that to be the case. I believe that this defense is getting better. This defense is getting better because they're getting healthier. Last year you didn't have Paschal, you didn't have Harris, you didn't have Okwara, and we didn't know who James Houston was. Now we know who all those guys are. And then Ali McNeil says, screw it, I'm going to lose some pounds and I'm going to lose some weight and I'm going to become a beast in the middle. If you're a Detroit Lions fan, this is probably the best thing that you could hear from training camp. And I know a lot of people don't take stuff out of training camp, and rightfully so, because if you're taking stuff out of training camp, sometimes you could be persuaded because maybe your team is bad or not. But we're really going to get to see this Lions team and the depth that they have in the preseason. And then we're going to hear more about the scrimmages that they have next week that could be really, really beneficial, especially with the Detroit Lions. We could get to know more about this team, and that would be really fun to watch. Now, I thought that, reading that and then reading how good the defense did today with the Detroit Lions was very paramount in showing what the Detroit Lions are all about. And I know a lot of people are not going to look at it the same way as me. But when you look at this team, and you say, man, they could be really good, we're not even kidding. Like, they could be really good, and that'll be fun to watch. Hopefully, they can be a very, very good spot in the team. So, look, no one is going to say anything if this defense is just not as good as it was or as good as we hoped. But I think a lot of people expecting the same defense last year, they're going to be very, very upset because this defense looks like they could be better. And obviously, you rely on Aiden Hutchinson, you rely on Charles Harris, you rely on James Houston to get better. You know, progression from the rookies of last year with Hutch, Pascal, and Houston. You expect them to get better. So if they get better, that could be very, very beneficial for the Detroit Lions in 2023. Exclamation point. This is from Tim Twentyman as well. He says, I thought the defense was a little better than the offense on Thursday, which is a great sign for the football team being better overall in 2023. But wide receiver Amon-Ra St. Brown finds a way to make a big play just about every day. And Thursday was no exception. He finished off a team period with a touchdown on a contested catch with cornerback Chase Lucas draped all over him. Lucas just put his hands on his head in disbelief after seeing St. Brown caught the football. St. Brown celebrated the score by punting the ball toward the crowd in the stands who loved the play and the celebration. Now, if you're watching on YouTube, you can see that the sun is coming in, and I'll fix that throughout the podcast. So, but look, if we're gonna get this Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is going to be electric, who we know Amon-Ra St. Brown, he is a very good player. He finds ways to get open. He finds opportunities to present himself. He gets open. He's one of those guys where even if you think he's covered, he's so smart and so instinctive that he finds a way. And it's kind of like a Keenan Allen. Keenan Allen is not one of those guys that you look at and you go, what a specimen. He's not Kelvin Johnson. He is not Julio Jones, DeAndre Hopkins. But those smarter guys sometimes they could be very beneficial for the Detroit Lions, especially when we talk about the Detroit Lions and their offense. And missing Jameson Williams for the first 6 games, you have St. Brown. You're not going to really lose anything. So it's going to be very impressive to see if St. Brown can continue this going into the season, which I assume that he will. St. Brown has showed year after year after year, that first rookie year, he came out of nowhere. Last year, he was a big part of the offense, and he was a critical piece for the Detroit Lions team. And I'm interested to see what happens when he gets a tight end like Sam Laporta, he gets a running back like Jahmyr Gibbs coming out of the backfield, and he gets Jameson Williams when he comes back from his suspension. This could be the unlocking of what we think Amon-Ra St. Brown could potentially be. Only issue you should have is that if he has a great year, you're going to have to pay him. And that will be interesting by itself because honestly, there's no way of knowing exactly what he would get in the open market, and we don't know what his contract would be because he's so useful in every phase of the offense. So if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you'll take the good with the bad, especially if Amon-Ra St. Brown has a great year this year. Injuries. The Lions got good news on Thursday. Wide receiver Trinity Benson's injury wasn't as severe as it looked to be Wednesday when he was carted off the field. The team will be hoping for similar good news good news Thursday after cornerback Jarren Williams went down with a lower body injury and was also carted off the field. So this is a tough part about training camp. You have injuries. Luckily, you avoided disaster with Chauncey Gardner-Johnson. It looks like you avoided disaster with Trinity Benson too. But when we get to this time of the year, a lot of people, they kind of get, how do you say it? There's times where injuries just happen out of nowhere, and you really get screwed out of your team's being successful or not. If it's a big time player, that's gonna suck. If it's just a guy who's a depth guy, it's gonna hurt your depth, obviously, but you can overcome that. I know, no offense to Jarren Williams or Trinity Benson, but those are injuries that you could probably overcome, to be honest. But if you lost a guy like Chauncey Gardner Johnson, if you lost a guy like Amon Ra or any of those guys, that's a huge loss. That's a huge loss. So you got to take the good with the bad, because obviously injuries are going to happen during training camp. You know, the non-contact injuries always happen during training camp, and you always hear of players tearing an ACL or players tearing and popping an Achilles. You always hear it, and you just hope that it's never your team, because if it's your team and it's one of your big time players, oh my god, it's a nightmare. You know, I remember when Chauncey Gardner Johnson had that injury scare earlier in training camp, and I was like, "Oh my god! Like this is something that just it makes you sick to your stomach to hear." So the good news is that Trinity Benson's going to be okay. They're hoping for good news with Jaron Williams too. They got good news with Chauncey Gardner Johnson. So the Lions have escaped injuries to this point. There's obviously going to be injuries, but you just don't want them to be two critical pieces. But the good thing about Brad Holmes and the way that he's built this offense and this whole team is there's depth everywhere. There's depth everywhere. This is why I said in the beginning of the podcast, this is why I bought into the Detroit Lions and what they're doing, because when you have depth, you're going to go through injuries throughout the NFL. It just doesn't even matter. Like you're going to go and have injuries throughout the NFL season. Your guard's going to get hurt, center's going to get hurt, someone's going to get hurt, and you're going to have a guy step in, and you're going to have to be fine, and you're going to have to roll with the punches, because that's the way the NFL is. It's pretty much, I always tell people, and I've always told people, you know, I do a Red Wings podcast too, Red Alert podcast. You can find that on Apple or Spotify. In hockey, football, basketball, sometimes baseball, the teams that win the championships, they're the teams that have got away with injuries more than the other team. It's been a survival of the fittest. So if you're a Detroit Lions fan, just understand there's going to be injuries at some time, but the Detroit Lions have never been they have never been in a position where they've had depth like they do now. So that would be good for the Detroit Lions to know. On the rise, this is Mike O'Hara, which he has a really good input on the Detroit Lions. He said McNeil lost about 20 pounds in the offseason. As a result, he's quicker and even stronger. Apparently, he can jump higher too. On a pass in the right flat, McNeil elevated and knocked the ball down. Now, this has been something that we've seen throughout training camp, and I'm starting to love this, because I always tell people, why don't these defensive linemen get their damn hands up and get in the passing lanes? Because there are quarterbacks that are coming in the NFL are smaller and smaller and smaller. I mean, look at Bryce Young, the number 1 overall pick. For God's sakes, the kid can't even like go on a roller coaster ride. Like, what are we doing? Get your hands up. You know, the guys like Anthony Richardson and the guys, Tom Brady's and all that stuff, they're going away. They're going away. With the spread offenses in college football, they're going to smaller quarterbacks. They are going to smaller guys in the pocket, and that should give if you're a defensive coach in college football, you should be telling your players, get your damn hands up and deflect the damn ball, because look, I remember, and it's a good thing that we know where this is coming from, because Aaron Glenn was on the New Orleans team, and there was a year that they led the whole league in deflected passes at the line of scrimmage. Cameron Jordan was a big part of it, but that whole defensive line, that was their main objective, was to get their hands in the air and deflect passes. And I think when the Detroit Lions played the New Orleans Saints that year, I think Stafford had like 6 or 7 that were deflected. So that is a good thing to happen. And if you're a coach at any level, Pee-wee, high school, middle school, whatever. I don't know if middle school plays football, because in the state of Michigan, we just have like these little leagues, and there's not much middle school, high school, middle school football. But if you're a coach at any level, Tell your defensive lineman, get your hands up in the passing lanes. You make it harder on the quarterback. The quarterback's going to have to go around you. And at some point, he's going to make a mistake, and it could end up in a deflection. It can go up to your linebackers. It could get deflected in the air, and one of your safeties or corners can come up with it. It's a very critical part of the game that people kind of overlook, and I don't understand why. But it's good to see that Detroit Lions are actually putting their hands up in the passing lanes, because when you go against Bryce Young, when you go against some of these guys, you can do that and put your hands up in the air and it'll be good. Ball production on defense. Quarterback Jared Goff doesn't throw many interceptions in practice, so it's worth highlighting a player when they get one. Goff tried to fit a ball down the seam to tight end Sam Laporta in the team drill. Laporta tried to go up to and over linebacker Derek Barnes, but Barnes was able to deflect the ball straight up into the air and right into the arms of defensive back Savion Smith. So, Derek Barnes has been really showcasing his talent, and he's been showcasing how good he can be. And if you're a Detroit Lions fan, you have to be excited about what Derek Barnes has been able to do. And if he can do what he's doing in practice in the passing game, that could be very, very beneficial for the Detroit Lions moving forward. And yes, Jared Goff doesn't turn the ball over in practice, but today the Detroit Lions defense forced those turnovers, and that's good to see. And hopefully, it's not a sign of Jared Goff doing the same thing in games. So we go down. The play of the day, this belongs to running back Justin Jackson for a long touchdown catch down the left sideline. He got a step on rookie linebacker Jack Campbell coming out of the backfield into the flat and was able to stay on his feet as Campbell tried to dive and clip at his feet. Then Jackson put a great move on defensive back CJ Gardner-Johnson, faking a cut inside at about the 10-yard line that allowed him to go untouched in the end zone. Jackson is definitely in the running to be Detroit's number 3 running back. That's per Tim Twentyman. I have no problem with Justin Jackson being a third running back. He showed that he is useful. If you watched him in San Diego or LA or whatever the hell they were in those 2 years where they were going from San Diego to LA, you've seen that Justin Jackson does have talent. You've seen that Justin Jackson can make plays with his feet, and you've seen that Justin Jackson does have some skill to him. So I'm not going to take anything by this. I'm not going to say like, oh, Jack Campbell missed a tackle, because Chauncey Gardner-Johnson did too. So obviously it was a good play and a good fake, and it was good athleticism by Justin Jackson. And I would easily pencil him into the number 3 spot on the Detroit Lions running back depth chart. Comparisons: Jerry Jacobs, who made the Lions roster as undrafted free agent in 2021, sees similarities between himself and rookie cornerback Starling Thomas. Thomas is a free agent trying to earn a roster spot at cornerback. He reminds me of me, Jacobs said, referring to Thomas's play style. You can never have enough Jerry Jacobs. I think this goes overlooked sometimes. If you have a guy like Jerry Jacobs on your team, or you have 2 Jerry Jacobs on your team, or 3 or 4, you're going to be better for it, because they are going to show the aggressiveness. They're going to show that they can be good against every obstacle. And when you're an undrafted free agent, you come in with a very, very big chip on your shoulder. We've seen that with Jerry Jacobs. We're starting to see that with Starling Thomas. We've seen that with AJ Parker. Brad Holmes has a knack for finding these guys who can help the team and build this team up. And if you get those guys that have a chip on their shoulder, it's basically 2 players, because they are playing for themselves and they're playing for their other self, which they refer to. If you listen to St. Brown, he goes through it. Like, look at all the wide receivers that are drafted ahead of me. And that's something that, you really can't put a price on. And Dan Campbell, I'm sure, loves it. I'm sure Brett Holmes, this is what he goes after, because you can't have enough guys who are just bulldogs. You can't. And Starling Thomas has had a really good training camp, and he's going to be a really good player for the Detroit Lions. I think he will make the roster, so that's going to be interesting. Returning punts, we are just a week away from the first preseason contest of the year, as I just said, which will be the first opportunity to see some live kickoff and punt returns. Khalif Raymond is Detroit's main punt returner, but St. Brown, Maurice Alexander, Jahmyr Gibbs, and Jameson Williams were also getting reps on Thursday. I think it's Raymond's job to lose. We all know that Maurice Alexander was great last year, and no, I do not want to see St. Brown. I do not want to see Gibbs, and I do not want to see Jameson Williams taking punts back because that's more of a risk of injury, and I just don't think that's a good idea. Um, this is the last point of this article, situational football. The offense that was given the ball on the defense's 37-yard line with 29 seconds left on the clock with 2 timeouts in the pocket late in practice, trailing 28-20. The first team offense quickly moved down to the 6-yard line in just 13 seconds with 2 completions to St. Brown. Again, St. Brown coming out of nowhere, playing his ass off. He's incredible. Running back David Montgomery punched it in from there with a run up the middle. The offense failed to convert a halfback pass for the 2-point conversion. The second team offense needed just 2 plays to score. A strike from quarterback Nate Sudfeld to wide receiver Denzel Mims down to the 4-yard line set up a tight end Brock Wright 4-yard touchdown on the next play. You love to see it. You love to see it. Denzel Mims getting a pass from Nate Sudfeld. I know a lot of people don't like Nate Sudfeld. There's a lot of people who want Teddy Bridgewater. I don't disagree with you. I think that Teddy Bridgewater could be good for the Detroit Lions. But ultimately, like if Nate Sudfeld shows out, I mean, he could be the backup quarterback for sure. I think a lot of people look at, is Teddy Bridgewater going to come or not? If I'm Teddy Bridgewater, I'm waiting and waiting and waiting and waiting. And it doesn't matter to the Detroit Lions because last year at this time, we had David Blau and Tim Boyle as our backup quarterbacks, and they both got cut, and that's when they signed Nate Sudfeld. So, interesting times. Training camp is always interesting. We're going to get down to the nitty-gritty next week when the Giants come to town, and they have those split practices. That will be fun to watch, and if you're going down there, that's going to be a lot of fun. And I hope you have a lot of fun because the Detroit Lions it's going to be fun to watch them hit someone that is not their team. Now, we have more planned on the program. I have 4 underrated players that people should be watching in 2023. We are also going to get to rookies who could really surprise people in 2023. And it's not going to be like your run-of-the-mill, Jack Campbell and Jahmyr Gibbs. It's going to be a little more broke down from that. And then we're going to have, our final thoughts as we always do on the Detroit Lions News podcast. So stay tuned to that. And if you're on YouTube and you're watching this, because I will post this before I post the podcast, make sure to subscribe here to the YouTube channel. We are going to post the podcast on YouTube, but we are also going to post the podcast in the link in the description below. You can listen to it on Apple, Spotify, Odyssey, wherever you get your podcast. Detroit Lions News podcast will be with you. So we will see you in the next segment as we talk about the Detroit Lions and 4 players who I think could be potentially breakout for the Detroit Lions in 2023.